Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the American Express Leadership Academy here in New York City. We have some people joining us virtually from our Leadership Academy with Thunderbird in Phoenix, and also some colleagues from Arizona State University, and people are joining us online through our live streaming. So welcome to all of you this afternoon. I'm Tim McClyman. I'm president of the American Express Foundation, and with me today is Dr. Reynold Levy, author, professor, business executive, fundraiser extraordinaire, sometimes comedian, and former president of Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts in New York City. So welcome, Reynold.
Thank you, Tim.
And I should say congratulations on your new book, which is called They Told Me Not to Take That Job: Tumult, Betrayal, Heroics, and the Transformation of Lincoln Center. And those of you in the room actually have a copy of that book. I'm sure you've all read it prior to this afternoon. We're going to get at what they told you and why you decided not to take that job in a minute. But first, I want to talk to you a little bit about Reynold Levy, the person, and also talk about your personal journey to Lincoln Center. I know you grew up in Brooklyn, attended Hobart College, University of Virginia, and Columbia University Law School. You went from there to be the staff director of the task force on New York City fiscal crisis. So we have a lot of young people with us who may be unfamiliar with the fiscal crisis here in New York. So could you tell us a little bit about how you got there and what your challenges were with that job?
So with the title Executive Director of the Task Force on the New York City Crisis, my friends then said I had a permanent job. In 1975, New York City was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. And in a very famous headline in the Daily News, President Ford had refused to help rescue New York from its bankruptcy, and the headline was, "Ford to New York, drop dead." And New York was extremely close to going bankrupt. And were it not for labor and business, including American Express, joining forces to help support bond issues that would temporarily set right the budget, New York wouldn't have made it. And people like Victor Gottbaum, who recently passed away, a great labor leader, Felix Rohatyn, Walter Wriston, then the head of Citibank, and David Rockefeller, and others really joined forces to put the city's finances on a proper trajectory, where they have been ever since. It was a major transformation. My job, I was working for a task force of agencies that represented agencies just like yours. And we were very concerned that in this period of austerity, budgets would be balanced on the back of poor people. That Medicaid, Medicare, social service funding would all be cut. And what we did, rather than just say no, what we did was to recognize that, in fact, there was a serious financial crisis, and we proposed counter budgets. Budgets counter to Mayor Beam's, budgets counter to Governor Carey's, that balanced the budgets, but in ways that did not adversely affect poor people. And I'm proud to say that many of the recommendations we made were adopted, because we created this very strong coalition of labor leaders, Catholic Charities, Federation of Jewish Philanthropies, the Board of Rabbis, the Cardinal. How do you say no to a cardinal? That supported these counter budgets. So that was
United Way a part of that?
United Way was a part of it. Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies was a part of it. Every important Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, every important social service agency, Community Service Society, Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, were all on this task force that worked together. We met weekly for 4 hours, and it was a very strenuous analytical effort and advocacy effort, both in New York City and in Albany.
So from there, you went on to become the executive director of the 92nd Street Y in New York, again at a pretty young age, I would say. So could you tell us a little bit about the Y and how you met the challenges that were presented there as a young leader?
So the 92nd Street Y is one of the oldest community centers in the country, and certainly the oldest Jewish community center in the country. And at the time was struggling. It was underutilized. It had seen better days. And my effort was to really gin it up programmatically with all kinds of social services, services to the mentally retarded, services to parents. I think we had the first parenting center in the city of New York. Services to senior adults, the largest health club still in the city of New York. It houses young people between the ages of 18 and 26 in a major residence. And then we filled up a great hall called the Kaufman Concert Hall, which was created for chamber music, filled it with solo artists, chamber musicians, created an orchestra, created a theater company, had a major film program. And the Y has always had an important, probably the most important poetry center, maybe in the world. So we moved the Y to a place of, I think, significance both on the Upper East Side where it's located, but more importantly for the entire city and we hoped for the country. And I'm happy to say, more or less, it's been thriving ever since.
So as a young leader, you must have had some challenges. This was really the first institution that you ran, is that right?
Correct. First institution that I ran.
So how did you make that transition as a young person? Most of these leaders with us are young and are in positions within their organizations that they hope to advance to become executive directors and presidents of their institution.
Well, panic helps a lot. I have always felt that sleep was highly overrated.
That's true. I can vouch for that, actually.
I think it's very important, and I would urge you all to be what I call in, but not entirely of, the institutions you're part of. In it fully, wanting to improve it, working hard at it, but keeping yourself psychically and intellectually distant enough so you can see it. There's a physicist, Freeman Dyson, who says if you're swimming inside of a bottle of Coca-Cola, you will probably know a lot about the ingredients of the liquid, but you will have long ago forgotten the shape of the bottle. So it's important for leaders to remember the shape of the bottle and to look outside the institution they are in. And one of the best ways I know how to do that is to read. Read widely and frequently. Another way to do it is to meet new people, often. Another way to do it is to travel a great deal, inside your city and outside, and explore and experiment. You will become a more interesting person as a result, and you'll also acquire skills, like listening skills, which I always thought when I was a young person was sort of, everyone listens, what's the big deal? And I learned as I experienced many jobs in life, how much listening is a really, really important thing to do well. So I define listening as listening to someone else with a willingness to change your mind. not waiting until someone finishes what they have to say so that you can say what you want to say. And if you listen carefully and look at the person to whom you're speaking, you'll pick up a lot, not just in the spoken word, but non-verbally. Listening also means asking the right questions, asking probing questions. I often encounter someone and then leave a lunch and say, did I really extract the value I could have in that half hour or that 45 minutes? Did I prepare enough? Did I know enough about the person I was encountering to ask the kinds of questions that would allow me to take away some significant learning? So in essence, Tim, I just read widely, met a lot of people, listened carefully, hired a terrific staff, and then supported them and tried to give them all the freedom they needed to do their best work.
Great. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit through your position as president of the AT&T Foundation, which is when I worked for Reynold. And then you went to be president of the International Rescue Committee, and then eventually became president of Lincoln Center. So clearly when you applied for the job of president of Lincoln Center, you knew that there were a lot of challenges and opportunities there. So I was wondering what really attracted you to the job, and just so that all of us are on the same page, if you could describe a little bit about how Lincoln Center is organized, because that was part of what presented the challenges. Right?
Okay, first I want to say that I'm really happy that Tim did not wear his "I survived Reynold Levy" sweatshirt. He's got them.
It's underneath there, actually.
He's got them in many colors, and he's dressed respectably for those who can't see him. Okay, so 9/11 happened, and the city I love and the city I was born in was shaken to its psychic foundations. I had never seen New York as anxious. I'd never seen New Yorkers as fearful and as worried about their families and about the future of the city. And I was a native New Yorker. I'd finished my work at the International Rescue Committee. I was bound for a tenured post at the Harvard Business School. And then 9/11 happened. And, I grew up in this town. I've waited all my adult life for the Second Avenue subway. I've waited all my adult life for the expansion of the Javits Center, for the conversion of the Moynihan Post Office, for just one respectable airport. And so when Lincoln Center was caught in this huge controversy over its physical redevelopment, in which the constituent organizations of Lincoln Center were fighting with one another over a plan to redevelop public spaces, its infrastructure, and its artistic facilities, I thought I might be helpful. And so I took a left turn from Cambridge to interview with the search committee. I promised the search committee that because I served refugees and was close to the UN and very friendly with the Undersecretary for Peacekeeping, that I could ask for peacekeeping troops to come to the Lincoln Center campus and separate the warring factions. So Lincoln Center is the parent body, often called the landlord. We're in charge of all the public spaces, one of the largest underground garages in the city, security. We raise money from the corporate community for all of the constituent organizations of Lincoln Center. We put the constituent organizations on television for some 41 years in a program called Live from Lincoln Center. And our board of directors helps to strengthen the boards of other institutions at Lincoln Center. Our staff interacts with all the comparable staff at Lincoln Center, so there's a chief financial officers group and a public relations group and a marketing group that's chaired by people who reported to me, and I met with all of the heads of these other 11 organizations, which include the Metropolitan Opera and the New York Philharmonic and the New York City Ballet and Jazz at Lincoln Center and the Film Society and the Chamber Music Society and the Library for the Performing Arts and so on, Lincoln Center Theater. So that's the construct, that's the basic construct. And the challenge was, how could Lincoln Center add value? How could it take this quarreling group of constituents and find common ground and create a set of incentives that would have them all cooperating with one another? That was the major challenge. My friends told me not to take that job because the atmosphere was really contentious, and if you go back and if you have a chance to open the covers of the book, you'll see that my book opens with some quotes from some of the leading periodicals and newspapers in New York City and around the country, talking about how soap opera-ish and how silly these controversies and petty these controversies appeared to be, and how toxic the environment was, which only attracted me more to it.
So how did you view your role there? So there are many ways as a president of that kind of institution you could act. You could be sort of a management consultant, a fundraiser in chief, a secretary of state. You could think of yourself as a chief executive with an unruly legislature, or as a landlord. So when you got there on your first day, how did you view your role there as president?
Well, first was strategy. How could I create a strategy that would resolve this major conflict over the future physical transformation of Lincoln Center? And what did that mean in terms of, for example, doubling the size of Lincoln Center's board and raising the expectations for giving and getting the kinds of dollars that we would have to get? How could I devise, with lots of help, a formula that would induce cooperation among the constituents, which included matching their own fundraising? So Lincoln Center became the largest donor to each of our sister organizations because we said we'd raise the money for their artistic projects. We also said we'd pay for every improvement of the public spaces of Lincoln Center. So $1.2 billion was raised. Lincoln Center raised $800 million of that $1.2 billion, and roughly $130 million of that went directly to our sister artistic organizations. So part of the job was strategy, part of the job was resolving conflict, getting to know my colleagues and the trustees of the organizations that compose these 11 separate organizations apart from my own. There are 512 of those trustees. They represent a cross-section of some of the most important players in New York City, most prominent players in New York City. But part of the job was sheer execution. I quote T.S. Eliot in the book, who says, between the conception and the execution lies the shadow. So how to remove that shadow and shed sunlight on the distance between wanting to do something and actually doing it is what I spent a lot of my time on, hoping that others could model their behavior accordingly.
So I wanted to ask you about the board. You talked about doubling the size of the Lincoln Center board. A lot of management consultants these days are recommending to organizations that they shrink the size of their board. Why did you take the opposite approach?
Well, first I'd fire those consultants. Or before I did, I would ask them, what organization did you ever run? Because if you look at the average size of the boards of organizations around the country and in New York City, beginning with Ronald Reagan, who was reducing federal funding, in almost every case I know of, boards have significantly expanded. Certainly university boards, certainly hospital boards, certainly artistic boards. Every one of Lincoln Center's boards of the constituent organizations model themselves on our enlarging our boards. And I was on the board of the Manhattan Theater Club, for example. Its board has doubled in size. The Roundabout board has doubled in size. So the necessity to have board members who not only will provide more money and networks, let you tap their networks of contacts and services, but as importantly, provide intellectual capital, really help you to think through the direction of the institution, engaging them in the life of the institution in a significant way. Not only invest them more, and as a result they give more, but also you learn a great deal from them. So we had real estate executives on the board who were immensely helpful as we redeveloped Lincoln Center. As we put 5 restaurants on the campus of Lincoln Center. We had restaurateurs help us select who would run those, because up until then there wasn't one commercial success at Lincoln Center of restaurants except for the grand tier of the Metropolitan Opera. And so we needed help, and we asked for that help. And boy, professionals love it. They love to leave their profession as successes and then come to a nonprofit institution and do something for the public. And so I think we were extremely fortunate to be able to tap the energy and intelligence of such a large cross-section of New York City in asking for help.
All right, so let's turn to the tell-all aspect of your book. You praise a lot of people.
Do we have to?
We do have to, actually. So you praise a lot of people, your board, your senior staff, people, leaders of some of the constituent organizations like the New York City Ballet. But you also take a number of leaders to task. Susan Baker and George Steele at the New York City Opera, Paul Gunther and Zarin Mehta at the New York Philharmonic, even Peter Gelb at the Metropolitan Opera. And the failure that you cite pretty consistently is one of leadership. So this is a leadership academy, American Express Leadership Academy. How do you think that these individuals failed their institutions from a leadership standpoint?
Well, first of all, I think at least an equal share of their responsibility, if not more, are their boards of directors. Their boards of directors selected these CEOs. They serve at their pleasure. They're supposed to hold them accountable for performance. So if there's a failure of accountability, it resides in the boards of directors who should be hiring CEOs who can do the job and then literally holding them accountable for service. At Lincoln Center, I created a set of objectives, very simple, every year, reviewed them with my chairman. We put metrics on them. We gave them to our executive committee. There was a robust conversation around them. And then at the end of the year, that's how I was measured as a proxy for the success of Lincoln Center. There was an executive committee of 25. They would meet for a couple of hours and evaluate my performance. And then I would get feedback. They were the best attended meetings of the year. I wish that were the case for every nonprofit institution, and I wish that were the case for all of the sister institutions. So to the degree that there isn't a sound strategy, financial and programmatic strategy for each of these institutions, I hold the boards responsible for that, ultimately. Now, professionals, once they're hired, need to do their work, need to do their job. And so I say this in sadness, not in anger. The New York Philharmonic has run an operating deficit for 15 successive years. It is the third oldest orchestra in the world, the oldest American orchestra, and it's housed in the richest city in our country. Why is its endowment considerably less than the Chicago Symphonies or the Boston Symphonies? Why are its trustees giving on average less money than the trustees of the Los Angeles Philharmonic? Why is the New York Philharmonic the only major orchestra without a summer home? Where orchestras have 52-week contracts a year and work 46, 47 weeks in most cases. Not the case with the New York Philharmonic. They've got to travel over the summer to small gigs. They miss opportunities to develop a whole new donor base. So there's an orchestra that has its work cut out for it. And the board should expect more of itself, and the staff should expect more of itself. The New York City Opera, I say in the book, died of self-inflicted wounds. It died of suicide, not homicide. And it continued to run significant deficits financially, borrow from its endowment, draw down on its endowment, to balance its budget, quote unquote, until literally it ran out of steam and out of cash. And so it, like most recently the Federation Employment Guidance Service here in New York City, is gone, bankrupt, gone. In the case of the New York City Opera, after 45 years, 47 years. In the case of the Federation Employment Guidance Service, 80 years. Yeshiva University, together with Albert Einstein Medical School, is on the brink of bankruptcy. Cooper Union is in a major controversy about its future. So along with so many other institutions, both at Lincoln Center and around the city, that have soared, that have done magnificent work. As I said earlier, I'm a native New Yorker. I've never seen New York University and Columbia University in better shape. I've never seen the Metropolitan Museum and the Whitney Museum and the Museum of Modern Art in better shape. Jazz at Lincoln Center has done a fabulous job. The Chamber Music Society at Lincoln Center has done a fabulous job, and so on and so forth. When trustees and staff are fully aligned, when everyone's holding each other accountable to the mission and working hard on it day in and day out and honest with one another, these institutions can soar. Sadly, the opposite can occur as well. And I thought it was time to shed some light on how that happens, how success happens, and how failure happens. So they told me not to take that job is really my attempt to do that.
So you've mentioned accountability a couple of times now, and in the last chapter of your book you have 25 lessons that you've learned as a leader. And one of those is being accountable for results and open to improvement. So you've talked about accountability. Could you talk a little bit about the open for improvement piece of that?
Yeah, for some reason, I don't understand it. The chairman even of my boards have been reluctant to give me feedback, particularly when it was critical of me. And I insist on it. So after those sessions, those private sessions that discuss things, the chairman would come in and say, congratulations, here's your bonus for the year. It was a great meeting. And I say, no. Come on. Are there trustees who feel that they've been marginal and not used properly inside the institution? Is there something that I can do with my colleagues around the campus that I haven't been doing? Has anyone noticed any difficulties in my relationship to staff? Didn't we fall a little short on our endowment objective for the year? Was anyone critical of that? And what about communication between you, Mr. Chairman or Ms. Chairman, and me? Are we talking about the right things? Are we focused not on getting things right, but on the right things for the institution? Are we communicating enough face-to-face, by email? Should we make an adjustment in how we relate to one another? So the effort to think about leadership as a continuous process of improvement, and to be open and to have a thick skin and to want to improve, it puts fresh air into an institution, brings oxygen into it. and hopefully creates an environment in which all of your colleagues are also open to improving. So that's the atmosphere I try to create, and that's part of the fun of leading, is what you can learn about yourself and your environment as you go forward.
One of the other lessons that you talk about is leading from outside in. What do you mean by that?
So this is a delicate balance. I don't know about you. When I leave the office, I know that the next day there are 5 things I've just got to do to lead the institution. And I know in the 4.5 hours that I go to sleep, there's a conspiracy.
Just repeat that again, 4.5 hours.
There's a conspiracy at work. People are actually on the phone figuring out how to stop me from doing those 4 things the next day. And so I really need to know them and move the institution forward, which would, I think, are those important 4 things. But guess what? The world is smarter than I am. And out in that world, including my colleagues, they may have some opportunities that I'm not aware of, that pop up, that may be more important than some of those 4 things I have in mind. And if I close myself off, if I don't read those emails, return those phone calls, reach outside the institution to others, I will miss those opportunities. So life for a leader is the balance between achieving the objectives you see for the organization and not being deterred from it, but not closing yourself off from your colleagues and from the outside world. And institutions that suffer, I think, kind of hone in on themselves and get too self-involved and forget that they need to be client-focused. If I'm a hospital, I need to be patient-focused. If I'm a university, I need to be student-focused. If I'm Lincoln Center, I need to be focused on artists and audiences and students as well. And you can only do that from the outside in. You can't do it just from the inside out.
On a personal level, you have a number of lessons that I think of, you as a leader, Reynold Levy as a leader. I know you very, very well. Things like, you've already mentioned read, travel, network, encounter art, pick up the pace. I think you're famous for picking up the pace. The persuasive power of the written word is another one that Reynold has really bugged me about for many, many years myself. So these are all very important lessons, and all 25 are important. But if you could pick 2 or 3 that are the most important to you, or that you'd like to convey into this group, which would you pick?
So you have an ally, I think. It's called the list and the watch. So time is your most precious commodity, and how you spend it is really critical. And composing that list of the people you want to meet, the things you need to read, what you want to accomplish, needs to be written down. And I don't know about you, but I get enormous psychic satisfaction from checking them off. Saw McClyman at the Leadership Academy. Got applause, at least at the beginning.
And a laugh or 2.
And a laugh or 2, thank you. By the way, I just wanted to establish my credentials. Always bring that with me. He's charging me for this. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Keep in mind the list and the watch, and think about each day and each week and each encounter and what you've accomplished. You will think about meetings very differently and how you spend your time very differently if you just take 5 minutes before you walk into it and say, what is it that I want to extract from this time? How will it serve those with me? How will it advance my objective? And the same on a one-to-one encounter. The same even in a phone call. What can I really accomplish. So being self-conscious, the conscious use of self, can really transform your activity and improve it. And measure yourself on it. Test yourself. You be the toughest judges of yourselves. I've never let others be a tougher judge on me than I am on myself. It makes life a lot easier if you expose yourself to the criticism of your chairman and you over-prepare and you are a lot tougher on yourself. So that's, I think, one very important lesson. I think another is to think about, as leaders, where you add most value and what your colleagues and those who report to you can do even better than you can. And to reserve your time for that which you can do best. So if you're the CEO of an organization, you really stand on a ladder. I know people don't like hierarchy, but the truth still is that Ken Chenault runs the place, American Express. And you kind of got to pay attention to him. And I'm sure there's lots of language about, an egalitarian culture, and everyone listens to everyone, and 360-degree evaluations and all that. We all know that Ken runs the place.
Yes, he does.
So he has to decide where he's going to add most value. And he stands on a ladder, and guess what? He can see further than anyone else in the organization. So while most people in the organization are probably worried about the next quarter, Ken, in addition to worrying about the next quarter, is worried about the trajectory of where American Express is going as an organization. And so if you take that just analogously into your own organizations and you think about whether you're thinking about a longer future than maybe your direct reports are, or helping your CEO, doing some things that free up the time of your CEO. I mean, if an employee were to come to me and say, Reynold, maybe I can take care of this for you. Let me try this. Instead of you doing that, let me draft this letter and free up that time. And if they can do it well, wow, that's terrific. So think about where you can add most value to your organization and try to preserve that time to do it and delegate to others whenever you're able, or suggest to colleagues whenever you're able what they can take over.
Great, terrific advice. We're going to get to questions from you in a minute, but I want to ask one more question of Reynold, and that's what career advice would you give an emerging leader in the nonprofit sector today?
So this is very, very similar to in but not of. If you are entirely immersed in your organization, but not entirely of it, you can see outside it. And if you can see outside it, you're going to be a better employee in it, but you're also going to be able to think about alternative futures outside it. So the advantages of reading, traveling, networking, meeting new people, seeing yourself in different kinds of situations immensely improves your performance in the organization you're in, but opens up avenues to different kinds of jobs and positions as well. So don't get so caught in organizational life and in your own organization that you are defined by it. Because if you are defined by it, it will be very difficult to move out of it at the appropriate time. So keep as open as you can to other possibilities. And let your imagination take the better of you. Imagine yourself in different roles. What would it be like if I worked there instead of here? What is that person really encountering? And you can do a lot of it yourself through your own experience, but I just want to emphasize, reading biography reading memoir, reading what other people experience, and imagining yourself in those roles can really be extremely helpful to you and enrich your life. So that would be my advice. My advice is you're always looking, you know? I mean,
I'm not, but you should.
I don't know. I like fashion. I'm always window shopping. I'm not always buying, but I'm always kind of curious. So let the curiosity, sense of discovery, get the better of you.
Terrific. Okay, we're going to turn to you for some questions. We're going to take a couple questions in the room here in New York, and then we're going to shift to Thunderbird and take a couple questions there. So please use the microphone. Yes, right here.
Hi, my name is Buddy Orange, and I work for a new settlement apartment. One of the themes, especially the first day, was around collective impact. And my question is, for organizations, including my own, where we're looking to kind of get our own house in order, it's similar to, I guess, what happens at Lincoln Center, how do you get people, or some of the Lincoln Center organizations who are trying to get their own house in order, get their own money, et cetera, what specific tactics and strategies did you use to create this more collective impact?
So let me give you an artistic analogy. You see a dancer soar into space, fly into space. And it's exhilarating because it's this enormous athletic act of freedom. But if you know that dancer, that freedom came from hours and hours and hours in the ballet studio and in the gym and with the physical therapist. It's the discipline that led to the freedom. So collective impact to me means, what is the discipline that leads us to our objectives? What is the method that has us going back and reviewing again and again our plan against our performance? There are three measures to me of performance. How are we doing this year compared with how we did last year? How are we doing this year compared with our plan for this year? But then there's the third. How are we doing this year compared with other admired institutions in a similar space? And then the most taxing is, how are we doing against our promise? How's our performance against, idealistically, what we can accomplish? So to achieve creative impact, I'm always thinking of those four tests. How are we doing year over year? How are we doing compared to plan? How are we doing compared to analogs, or if you want, competitors? And what's the gap between our promise and our performance? And are we bridging that gap year after year? So what are the disciplines and methods inside the organization that we are applying to help see that we do better and better year over year on those tests?
Great. Yeah, question over here maybe? Yes, way over here in the corner.
Hi, I'm Tina Vasquez from Pathways to Leadership, and I wanted to know, how did you find mentors, and who did you look for, who found you, and how did you know they were the right person to guide you to the next step in your career?
So this is part of going out and meeting people. You know, one of the things I've discovered in life across these sectors that I've been lucky enough to work in, government, corporations, nonprofits, everyone is insecure. Everyone. Honest. Everyone's filled with anxiety. Henry Kissinger was on the board of the International Rescue Committee. I would sometimes go out to a speech with him. He'd give a speech. He'd get a standing ovation. He'd lead the speech. He'd turn to me. He'd say, "How'd I do?" I said, Henry, you got a standing ovation and people were applauding. He said, yeah, but you know, it only lasted 4 minutes. How did I do, really? So meeting people that you admire, finding a linkage to them, or even just writing to them and saying, I've long admired your work, could I have 15 minutes of your time? Or finding someone who can. And then asking intelligent questions that impress them with what you've learned, what you've troubled to learn about them, right? So if I want to extract funds from Tim McClyman, which I did all of my life at Lincoln Center, I want to...
And before that.
And before that. I want to start the conversation with, how's his wife? How's his child? How's business at American Express? Keep up with what's going on at American Express. Well before we get to Lincoln Center. I'll express an interest in him and his context because it's a two-way street. And most potential mentors love talking about themselves. Love it. I mean, that's what people do. They like to talk about themselves if they're asked intelligent questions. So keep your eye on what are the things I need most? What's the kind of guidance that would be most useful to me? And who could provide it, both inside the organization and outside the organization? And then try to introduce yourself to that person in an interesting way. And I've had many people say quite explicitly, can I see you from time to time? I'd love to see you from time to time. And part of my reaction is, sure, but let's multiply the ways we see one another. So how about an exchange of emails? And how about some phone conversations? And how about, so it's not so taxing on my time. So be user-friendly when you ask a mentor for advice. Try to adapt to their schedules and their needs.
So by the way, when I was a young professional at the National Endowment for the Arts, I found Reynold as my mentor. And he has been enormously successful, or helpful, I should say, successful too, but helpful to me through my various positions and helped me decide to go to law school and helped me with a number of different changes in my life. So thank you for that. I think we have a question from Thunderbird.
We do. Okay, the first one is, what are the key characteristics and skills you look for when selecting people for leadership roles?
So just a quick Thunderbird story before I answer that question. We had a rule at the AT&T Foundation, not many, but one rule was we did not give to chairs, to fund chairs or endowments. And the president of Thunderbird came to see me, along with an executive at AT&T who had graduated from Thunderbird. And he opened by saying, Mr. Levy, I'm here to ask for a chair. And I said, Mr. President, did you have an opportunity to look at our guidelines? Because we have very few limitations, but one of them is we don't fund chairs. And he said, no, this is different. This is a folding chair. So you pay for it over 3 years, and then it folds, and we put it away. So they're very clever people over there at Thunderbird. So, to me, this question is very much like, what do you look for in interviewing, right? What do you look for in hiring people? And I make an assumption about skill level, that the skills and knowledge I'm looking for have to be there. And then I look for intangible qualities, for energy, curiosity, ambition, ability to work alone and ability to work in teams. I've never met anyone successful in any profession who works 9 to 5. I want people who are so excited about what they're doing that they take their work home with them, wherever home is, at least for part of the time, because they're so excited and turned on by what that next day can be. Kevin Ryan of DoubleClick fame and says that if he had to choose between a resume, an interview, or reference checks with those that haven't been provided by the candidate, he would pick reference checks every time. And too few organizations dig down and really find out what the prior experience was of someone in their prior jobs by doing reference checks. I wouldn't be casual about this. This is one of the few things that Peter Drucker, the great management guru, who never counsels patience and being methodical, always counsels give it a try and then correct. The one exception is hiring, where he feels you need to be really thorough, because if you make a mistake, it can set the organization back a lot, but if you are successful, it can mean a great deal for the organization. So I'm looking for those intangible qualities, and I personally spend a fair amount of time for important positions, even as the CEO, doing reference checks. I think our DoubleClick friend, Kevin Ryan's got good advice.
Another question online.
How do you balance work and family life?
So
He doesn't sleep.
Here I'm pretty controversial. I know. So in all of the jobs I've had, guys, I'm sorry, I have found women. If I had to choose, I have just found women much more team-oriented and much more efficient in how they use their time than I have found men. It's a gender bias, I confess to it. I've also been very biased toward not caring where people work. They can work wherever they want, or what hours they work. I'm not interested in inputs, I'm interested in outputs, as long as they're available when they need to be available. So the environments I've created are very family friendly. And if you need to be with a parent or you need to be with a child, God bless you, you'll organize your time. You're adults. You'll figure it out. But I want to report to you that opportunities at work don't come conveniently. They're not organized in accordance with your family life. That's not what CEOs think about, right? So I believe in balance between family life and work, but I don't think you can be balanced every day, every week, even every year. I think there are times when the professional pressures are high, the opportunities to accomplish are great, and for those who really care about it, you need to seize them. And that may cause some sacrifice. That may mean asking your spouse or your friend or whomever you're most close to step up to fill a role that you might otherwise really want to fill so that you can do that work. And there'll come a time when your partner will need the same thing. So if the family thinks of itself as a unit that supports one another, that can help be a shock absorber and calibrate what you may need to do if you need to fully invest in your work. And I've been very fortunate to have a spouse who's been just terrific in understanding what was going on. And it's very helpful to talk about that at home and with your friends so that they can really understand the dynamic. And often friendship peers can be extraordinary mentors, and so can your close members of your family, including, if you get old enough like me, your children.
Another question from the room here, right straight here in the middle.
Hi, I'm Danielle Guindo from the Committee for Hispanic Children and Families. I haven't read your book yet, but I will, so the answer may be in there. But I wondered if you could tell us about a time when you failed and how you dealt with that and what you learned and how you moved past it.
So there, in the book, you will find a piece of a chapter devoted to the things that I wish I had done better at Lincoln Center. or regrets that I had at Lincoln Center. Now, I was careful not to bury the lead, which I hope was a good tenure and a good time for Lincoln Center, and I genuinely hope that people think it's much stronger than when I found it. But there were several things I left with regret about. One of them was that I allowed David Blaine to swim in an aquarium in front of Lincoln Center for an entire week, making a spectacle of the place, but attracting millions and millions of people at ABC. My chairman approved it. If I had to do it over again, I wouldn't do it. If New Yorkers want water, they should go to the beach. I think I made an error in judgment when I did that. I wish that as part of the redevelopment of Lincoln Center, we could have included Avery Fisher Hall, the hall in which the New York Philharmonic plays, in which Lincoln Center presents many events. But the New York Philharmonic got this idea of going to Carnegie Hall at one point during my tenure. It was a 6-month round trip. It was a terrible embarrassment. It was a refugee orchestra. It was part of the New York Philharmonic being adrift. And as a result, we weren't able to embrace it as part of the plan to redevelop Lincoln Center. That's part of my successor's job, and he will take that on. I wish that could have been included. When I've made mistakes, they tend to be more acts of omission rather than commission. They tend to be more from holding back and watching something happen. One of the things I have learned in life, 2 things do not age well: problems and opportunities. They just don't age well. And so, for example, if an employee is really not working out, people try to be sympathetic and keep the employee on longer. It's a mistake, both for the organization and for that employee. Right person, good person, wrong job. So it's not that people say to me about the parts of the book that are rather tough on leaders. They say to me, I like George Steele. He was the head of the New York City Opera when it went bankrupt. And I said, I like him more than you do. What's that got to do with his performance? This is not a country club. This is a public institution. We have to be accountable for performance. So it wasn't so much, it was George is a good person who did fabulous work at the Miller Theater at Columbia University. He's a right person. He just was not in the right job. So when you find that, moving more quickly to help someone out. My frequent question is, you really seem uncomfortable. I mean, you really seem like you're uncomfortable. How can we work together to find a position for you that makes sense for you? So even in things like tough things like personnel, those problems don't age well.
One last question, Reynold. What's next for Reynold Levy?
So my accountant came to me recently. I'm revealing too much. And he said, Reynold, when you get 12 W-9s, you're working a little too hard. So I took on too much after I left Lincoln Center, promising myself beaches and books. And the only part that was true was the book that I wrote. So I've been a special advisor to a private equity firm, General Atlantic. I've been helping out a couple of nonprofits to grow to scale, the National Council on Learning Disabilities, and a foundation called the JED Foundation, which was named after a young man who committed suicide and university, and it's an organization that I love that's devoted to detecting stress in university students and addiction and intervening, getting universities to prepare better to detect that stress and intervene and prevent suicide. I'm on a bank board. I'm on the board of First Republic Bank. I'm a member of the Tony Committee for the Tony Awards. I'm working
Which
with...
means, by the way, that you had to see every Broadway show.
I did.
Right?
I had to see every Broadway show. No one feels sorry for me all my life. And I'm working with a philanthropist, actually just a very wealthy guy who gives away money, who now wants to establish a foundation. And so I'm working with his children, his stepchildren, and the 3 people who helped him earn an enormous amount of money, all earned in 25 years, that he now wants to establish a foundation to give away half of his net wealth. It will be the 8th largest foundation in the country. It will be capitalized at about $8 billion. So I've done this before for other families, but doing it for this particular family, it being such a large institution, it's been a lot of fun. Now, the only reason I've mentioned all these things is because, and I just finished teaching a graduate school course at Columbia Business School and School of International Public Affairs on the dynamics of leadership across these 3 sectors. The only reason I mention all these things is what's so much fun is that none of those places I work in care about my success or failure in the others. It's like, we don't care you're a good professor. Get down to work in this investment firm. We don't care that you're good at that. Help us grow to scale. We don't care that you're good at that. Give our family advice. So testing yourself in different ways, in different skills, in different environments. We don't care about all those other things. You got to write this book well, says your editor. So I really highly recommend to you trying out different roles for yourself, inside your organization and outside, and testing yourself against other things, and not being complacent in an effort to grow. So that's what I've tried to do, Tim, but I've resolved, I promised my accountant, no more than 8 W-9s.
Okay, we'll hold you to that. Please join me in thanking Dr. Reynold Levy for being with us.